Chapter 1. The Forbidden Ceremony. In the kingdom of Valora, nestled among the jagged peaks of the Skirich Mountains, the people revered the ancient dragons that soared above their heads. These creatures, majestic and terrifying, were not just creatures of myth, but part of the very fabric of Valoran society. They were the rulers of the skies, their fiery breath said to be able to scorch entire villages to the ground. The people had lived in harmony with them for centuries, abiding by rules, sacrifices, and traditions that ensured their kingdom's prosperity and protection. There was a deep, unspoken understanding between the kingdom and the dragons, one that had been passed down through generations, woven into the very soul of the kingdom. It was said that the dragon kings watched over the land, keeping it safe from outside threats, but they required something in return, a price that had been paid for as long as anyone could remember. Every 100 years, the kingdom would offer a sacrifice to the dragon kings. It was a sacred ritual, a tradition that no one dared question. The offering was always a dragon, a creature of great power, one that would placate the dragon kings and ensure the peace would remain. To go against the ritual was unthinkable, heresy that could bring ruin upon the kingdom. Those who had opposed it in the past had vanished without a trace, their names erased from history. No one ever dared to challenge the old ways, not if they wanted to avoid the wrath of the skyborn rulers. This ceremony was a necessary evil, or so the people had been told. Over the years, the sacrifices had become more of a performance, a tradition that had lost much of its meaning but remained essential nonetheless. It was a ritual filled with grief and honor, a tribute that was viewed with both reverence and sorrow. Yet this time, the upcoming ceremony was different. This time, the sacrifice was a baby dragon, an infant, barely able to open its eyes. The dragon had been found in the wilds, injured, crippled by an unknown curse that had left its wings paralyzed, its body unable to move, its once vibrant scales now a dull, splotchy color. It had been captured by the kingdom's hunters, brought in chains to the city, where it was treated like little more than a prisoner awaiting its fate. The baby dragon, once a symbol of hope and strength for its kind, was now a broken, defenseless creature, bound to be offered up to appease the dragon kings in an ancient ritual that few understood anymore. Its cries, soft and pitiful, could be heard echoing through the stone streets of the city as it was paraded before the masses, its tiny form dragged along by thick iron chains. It was an image that left a bitter taste in the mouths of many who watched, yet there was no room for protest, no room for compassion. The ritual had been set in motion, and nothing could stop it. Not even the small voice of reason that struggled to rise from the corners of some hearts. The sky was heavy with dark clouds as the great festival square, usually filled with celebration and joy, stood eerily silent. The sacrificial altar, a massive stone structure in the center of the square, was already prepared, its surface polished to a high shine, waiting for the blood of the creature that would lie upon it. On the steps leading to the altar, the council of elders, dressed in their ceremonial robes, stood with their heads bowed, the weight of the occasion pressing down on them. These men and women, the ruling council of Valora, were not heartless. They had raised the ritual as their ancestors had before them, but there were those among them who questioned its necessity. There were those who had long pondered whether the time for such sacrifices had passed, whether there was another way to ensure peace with the dragons, but no one dared voice such doubts. Not in public, at least. The thought of defying the centuries-old tradition was enough to send chills through even the most seasoned leader. Among the crowd, one figure stood apart from the rest, a young girl no older than 8. Her name was Leora, and though she was small in stature, her heart was full of courage. She had always been different from the other children in the village, more perceptive and inquisitive than most, questioning the things others simply accepted. She had heard the stories about the sacrifices, had seen the smoke rising from the altars during the previous ceremonies, but she had never truly understood why it had to happen. Dragons were not just creatures of destruction, they were part of the kingdom, part of the cycle of life, and yet, year after year, they were sacrificed for the sake of maintaining peace with their kin. Leora had never been content with this explanation. She had seen the baby dragon being led to the altar, its paralyzed form a pitiful sight. She had felt her heart break for the poor creature, unable to move or defend itself, and she had made a silent vow to herself that she would not stand idly by and watch another life be taken without a reason. As she stood on the outskirts of the crowd, her eyes fixed on the dragon, she noticed something that made her pause, something that made her breath catch in her throat. The baby dragon's eyes were wide open, though glazed with fear, and as they met hers, Leora felt a strange, powerful connection surge through her. It was as if the dragon knew she was there, knew she could help. She couldn't explain it, but she knew at that moment that this was no ordinary dragon. It was something different, something that called to her in a way no creature ever had before. And then, Leora saw it. The faintest glow emanated from the dragon's paralyzed limbs, a soft, golden light that flickered and pulsed like a heartbeat. Leora blinked, thinking she must have imagined it, but the light grew stronger, more pronounced. It wasn't just a flash, it was a signal, a message. And as she watched, the light swirled around the dragon's body, gathering at the center of its chest, where a symbol one Leora recognized from her grandfather's old scrolls appeared. It was a symbol of ancient power, one that had long been thought lost to time. Leora's heart raced as she reached out, her small hands trembling, but before she could take another step forward, a hand grabbed her shoulder. She spun around to face the grizzled face of old Tomas, the village blacksmith, who had been watching her with narrowed eyes. "What do you think you're doing, girl?" Tomas growled, his voice low and gruff. "You're not supposed to be here. This is no place for children." Leora opened her mouth to protest, but Tomas silenced her with a sharp look. "You don't understand. They're going to kill it, just like they always do. It's the way of things, and we have no say in it." But Leora wasn't listening anymore. The dragon's eyes were locked on hers, and the strange pulse of magic was growing stronger with every passing moment. She knew, deep down, that something was wrong with the ceremony, something that could not be allowed to happen. The sacrifice wasn't meant to happen this way. The dragon wasn't supposed to be sacrificed, it was supposed to be saved. Leora darted around Tomas, ignoring his protests as she sprinted toward the altar. Her legs were small, and the crowds were thick, but she pushed through, determined to reach the dragon before it was too late. As she neared the altar, the elders began to chant, their voices rising in a steady, rhythmic cadence. The ceremony was in full swing. Leora's heart pounded in her chest as she reached the base of the altar, her hands outstretched toward the paralyzed dragon. She didn't know what she was doing, but something inside her told her that if she didn't act now, the dragon would die. Without thinking, she placed her hand on the baby dragon's forehead, and as soon as she did, a surge of energy erupted through her body. It was as if the dragon's magic had been waiting for her touch, and in that instant, the connection was complete. The golden light that had been swirling around the dragon's body erupted in a brilliant flash, and the chains that bound it to the altar shattered into pieces, clattering to the stone floor. The dragon's wings twitched, then flared out, the once paralyzed limbs now moving freely as if the curse that had bound it had been lifted. Leora gasped in awe as the creature, now fully awake and alive, looked at her with an expression of profound gratitude in its glowing eyes. The crowd fell silent as the dragon slowly rose to its feet, its massive body shifting with a power that was almost overwhelming. For a moment, it seemed as if time had frozen. The elders stared in shock, their chants dying in their throats as the baby dragon's full form emerged from the ruins of the sacrificial chains. It was no longer an offering, it was a creature reborn. Leora stepped back, her breath coming in ragged gasps. What she had done, what had happened, was beyond her understanding, but one thing was clear: she had saved the dragon, and in doing so, she had unleashed something far more powerful than anyone could have imagined. As the dragon spread its wings wide, the ground beneath them trembled, and Leora's eyes widened with realization. This was no ordinary creature. This was a force of nature, a force that would change the kingdom of Valora forever. The baby dragon stood before the altar, its scales shimmering in the faint light of the torches. For a moment, the entire square was silent, and the heavy tension in the air hung like an invisible shroud over the crowd. The people of Valora had been taught to accept the ceremonies, to view them as sacred, a necessary act to maintain peace and prosperity. But now, as they watched the spectacle unfold, something seemed off. Even the elders, those who had orchestrated this event with religious devotion, couldn't tear their eyes away from the spectacle that was unfolding before them. The dragon's eyes, those deep, glowing, almost human eyes, locked onto Leora's with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. There was a strange, ancient power behind them, something that spoke not just to her, but through her. Her hand still rested on its forehead, the warmth of the dragon's skin seeping into her small fingers. But it wasn't just physical warmth she felt, it was an overwhelming wave of energy, a pulse that made her heart beat faster. The dragon's wings twitched again, and its small form seemed to grow, its body swelling with energy, as though it were drawing strength from the very earth beneath it. Then, with a mighty roar that sent a shiver down Leora's spine, the dragon leapt off the altar. The chains that had once held it fell to the ground with a loud crash, their once imposing weight reduced to nothing more than useless scraps of iron. The crowd gasped, the shock evident in their wide eyes. It was as though the ritual had gone horribly wrong. This wasn't supposed to happen. The baby dragon, once paralyzed and broken, was now on its feet, fully alive, fully restored, and utterly unafraid. Its gaze shifted from Leora to the gathered crowd, and for the first time, the people of Valora realized that they were witnessing something they couldn't explain. The dragon wasn't just a creature to be sacrificed, it was something much more powerful, much more important than anyone had ever known. Leora stepped back, her heart racing. What had she done? How had she done it? She had only intended to touch the creature, to comfort it. But in that moment, she had unlocked something deep within the dragon, something that no one could have predicted. The dragon's body was now glowing with golden light, its wings unfurled and flapping with such force that the air around it seemed to vibrate. For a moment, it looked as if the dragon might take flight, but it didn't. Instead, it turned its attention back to Leora, the bond between them unbroken. The crowd remained still, too stunned to speak, but it was the elders who reacted first. They stepped forward in unison, their hands raised, their faces a mixture of awe and fear. The head elder, a tall man with a silver beard and an air of unshakable authority, moved toward the dragon. His voice was low, steady, and commanding as he addressed the creature. "This is forbidden," he said. "You were meant to be sacrificed. This is the will of the Dragon Kings." But the dragon didn't respond to him. Instead, it let out another roar, louder this time, more forceful, and the ground beneath them trembled. The people took a step back, their eyes wide with fear. This wasn't a dragon meant for ceremonial offerings. This was a dragon that had been freed, one that was not bound by the traditions of the kingdom. Leora looked up at the elders, her heart pounding in her chest. "It's not supposed to be sacrificed," she said, her voice shaking with the urgency she felt. "You can't kill it. It's not just a baby dragon. It's different. It's special." The elder who had spoken before shook his head, his expression darkening. "It was a gift to the Dragon Kings. We had no choice. The ritual must be completed." He reached for a ceremonial dagger at his side, his face hardening with resolve, but Leora's eyes widened in horror. She realized with sickening clarity that they intended to try and kill the dragon anyway. The ritual had been disrupted, but they couldn't allow it to be abandoned, not without facing the wrath of the gods. "No," Leora shouted, stepping forward. "Please don't dash." Before she could say another word, the dragon's head swung toward the elder. Its golden eyes glowed with a fierce intelligence, its body crackling with untapped energy. The dragon opened its mouth, and a jet of fire shot from its throat, landing in front of the elder and singeing the stone beneath his feet. The fire wasn't hot enough to burn him, but it was a warning, a fierce reminder that it would not tolerate violence. The people gasped, stepping back in fear. Even the elder, who had once stood so tall and unshaken, now looked stunned and uncertain. But Leora wasn't scared. She stepped forward once again, her small hand reaching toward the dragon. "Please," she said softly, her voice filled with compassion. "Don't hurt them. You don't have to do this. I will protect you." The dragon's eyes softened at her words, and for a brief moment, it seemed as though it understood her, its fiery breath dissipating into a soft, glowing aura. It turned away from the elder and lowered its head toward Leora. The bond between them felt stronger now, as if something ancient and powerful had been awakened within both of them. Leora reached out, her hand brushing against the dragon's snout. The dragon closed its eyes, letting out a contented purr, a sound that echoed like a deep rumble through the square. For a long moment, there was silence, broken only by the sound of Leora's breathing and the occasional crackle of the fading light from the dragon's fire. The crowd watched in stunned silence, unsure of what to do, unsure of what this moment meant. The elders stood motionless, their hands still raised, unsure of how to proceed. The air itself seemed to shimmer with magic, thick and heavy with the tension of the moment. Finally, it was Leora's voice that broke the silence. "Please, don't sacrifice the dragon. Let it go. It's not just an offering. It's alive, and it's a part of us." The head elder stared at her, his expression unreadable. He was a man bound by duty, but even he couldn't deny the truth in Leora's words. Slowly, he lowered his hand, his fingers twitching as though unsure of the path he should take. He turned to the other elders, who were now murmuring amongst themselves, their voices low and tense. There was no clear leader anymore, no one who could decide the fate of the dragon. The air hung heavy, the weight of their decision pressing down on them. The ceremony, the ritual, the entire kingdom's traditions, they all stood at a precipice, waiting for someone to make a choice. And then, the unthinkable happened. With a quiet but firm gesture, the elder stepped back. He bowed his head to Leora. "It is done," he said softly. "The sacrifice is over." Chapter 2. The Awakening. The people of Valora had long been taught to trust in the ancient rituals, to believe in the old ways that had governed their lives for centuries. The elders had always been the keepers of tradition, the ones who determined the course of the kingdom. But that day, Leora had changed everything. By touching the baby dragon, by giving it the compassion it needed, she had not only saved its life, but she had also shattered the very foundation of the kingdom's customs. The sacrifice, once seen as the only way to ensure peace with the dragon kings, was no longer required. And yet, as the dragon stood before them, its wings outstretched, its body glowing with the power it had been given back, it was clear that the kingdom was about to enter a new era. The dragon kings were still watching, but they were no longer the ones in control. Leora felt the weight of what she had done settle upon her, but there was no fear. Instead, there was a quiet sense of determination. She had chosen to protect the dragon, and in doing so, she had chosen to protect Valora itself. She was the one who had broken the cycle, the one who had dared to defy the old ways, and now the kingdom would have to find a new way forward. As the people began to disperse, still murmuring in confusion and awe, Leora stood alone with the dragon. She had no idea what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain: this was just the beginning. The dragon lowered its head toward her once again, nuzzling her gently with its snout. She smiled, her heart swelling with pride and hope. The bond they shared was stronger than anything she had ever known. Together, they would face whatever came next. And together, they would change the future of Valora forever. The square, once heavy with the air of ritual and sacrifice, was now filled with an uneasy silence. The crowd, still reeling from the dragon's unexpected defiance, began to disperse slowly. Some of them whispered in hushed tones, their faces painted with confusion and awe, as if they couldn't quite believe what they had just witnessed. Others, however, were more open in their dismay, their anger rising like a storm as they began to question everything they had been taught. For years, generations even, the people of Valora had believed that the sacrifices were necessary, that they were the price they paid for peace with the mighty dragon kings. But Leora's actions had thrown all of that into chaos. Standing before the crowd, Leora felt the full weight of what she had done. Her small body trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer enormity of her decision. She had saved the dragon, yes, but what would come next? What consequences would she face for defying the ancient customs of the kingdom? As the murmurs of the crowd swirled around her, she couldn't help but feel like she was standing on the edge of something much larger than she could comprehend. The kingdom was on the brink of change, and she had no idea what the next step would be. The baby dragon, now fully revived and filled with energy, took a few hesitant steps toward Leora. Its wings flared slightly, and the soft golden glow that had once surrounded its body pulsed with power. Leora crouched down, reaching out a hand to gently stroke the dragon's scales. The creature's warmth seemed to surge through her, calming her racing heart and grounding her in a way she couldn't quite explain. There was an undeniable connection between them now, one that went beyond the physical touch. It was as if the dragon and she were bound by something ancient, something far greater than either of them. It was a bond that had been formed in the very heart of this ritual, a bond that would shape the future of Valora itself. Leora smiled softly as the dragon nuzzled her hand with its snout, its eyes glowing with an intensity that seemed to match her own. In that moment, it was clear that the dragon trusted her, that it saw her not as a child, but as its protector. It was no longer the weak, paralyzed creature that had been brought to the altar. It had been awakened, not just physically, but spiritually, and it was now more powerful than it had ever been before. And Leora, in some inexplicable way, had become its guardian. As the last of the crowd dispersed, Leora stood up, her mind still whirling with questions. She had saved the dragon, yes, but now what? Would the elders accept this change? Would they see the dragon as something other than a tool for appeasing the Dragon Kings? What did the Dragon Kings themselves think of the ceremony's disruption? She didn't know, but one thing was certain: the dragon had changed her life forever. She wasn't just a child anymore, standing by the sidelines of history. She had become part of something much greater, something that would define the future of the kingdom. Just as Leora was about to turn away from the altar, a voice called out to her, one that was unmistakably familiar. Leora. It was Tomas, the village blacksmith. He pushed his way through the last of the lingering crowd, his expression a mixture of concern and admiration. What in the heavens have you done? Leora turned to face him, her eyes wide. Tomas had always been kind to her, a strong, reliable figure in her life. He had taken care of her when her parents had passed away, and although he was an elder in the village, he had never treated her like a child. But today, as he approached, there was something else in his eyes, a kind of respect, but also a deep uncertainty. Tomas had been one of the few in the village who had questioned the rituals, though he had kept his thoughts hidden for fear of being labeled a heretic. But now, with the dragon standing before them, he couldn't deny what Leora had done. "You've changed everything," Tomas said, his voice quiet but filled with awe. "The dragon, it was supposed to be a sacrifice. But now, it's alive, and you've broken the cycle. The people will not know what to make of this." Leora took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. "I didn't mean to. I just couldn't let them kill it. It's not right, Tomas. This dragon, it's special. It's not just an offering to the Dragon Kings, it's more than that. It's part of something much bigger." Tomas nodded slowly, his gaze drifting toward the dragon, who stood quietly beside Leora, its wings still extended. The creature was magnificent, radiating a quiet, almost regal power that could not be ignored. Tomas knew that this wasn't just any dragon. There was something ancient about it, something that felt older than the very rituals that had governed the kingdom. And as he watched the connection between Leora and the dragon deepen, he couldn't help but feel that perhaps the time had come for the old ways to be questioned, for the kingdom to move into a new era. "You're right," Tomas said after a long pause. "This dragon, it's not just a creature to be sacrificed. It's something else, something beyond our understanding. You've given it a second chance, Leora, and in doing so, you've given all of us a chance. But now, we have to face the truth. The Dragon Kings, they're not going to be pleased. We've broken the tradition, and they will not let this go easily." Leora's heart skipped a beat at the mention of the Dragon Kings. She had known, deep down, that there would be consequences. She had hoped that the dragon's revival would bring peace, that the ritual would be abandoned in favor of a new understanding. But Tomas was right. The Dragon Kings were not beings who could be appeased so easily. They were powerful, ancient creatures who had ruled over Valora for centuries. What would they do now? Would they come down from their mountain strongholds and demand retribution? "I don't know what we're going to do," Leora said, her voice small. "But I couldn't just stand by and watch it die. I have to protect the dragon, Tomas. It's the right thing to do." Tomas sighed, his brow furrowing with concern. "You're brave, Leora. But this is bigger than just the dragon. The fate of the kingdom might rest in your hands now. The question is, will the people accept it? Will they accept what you've done?" Leora didn't have an answer for him. She only knew one thing: she had made the right choice. The dragon had chosen her, and she had chosen to protect it. She could feel it in her bones. Whatever came next, she was ready. She had no choice but to stand firm, to defend what was right, even if it meant going up against centuries of tradition. As Tomas left to return to his work, Leora stayed by the dragon's side, her mind racing with possibilities. The kingdom was at a crossroads, and she had just altered the course of its future. She didn't know what the Dragon Kings would do, but she knew this. She would face it head on. She would not back down. She had saved the dragon, and now, together, they would face whatever came next. Chapter 3: The Dragon's Call. Days passed, and the kingdom of Valora shifted, as though the very air itself had changed. Leora couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental was happening, something that would echo through the ages. The dragon, whom she had saved from sacrifice, had taken up residence in the outskirts of the village, hidden away in a secluded cave. Leora visited it every day, bringing it food, water, and sometimes just sitting by its side, silently watching as it grew stronger. The dragon's wings were no longer crippled. They stretched out wide, glimmering like molten gold in the sunlight. Its body, once frail and weak, was now filled with a quiet power that seemed to hum with energy. But as the days turned into weeks, the tension in the village grew palpable. The elders held secret meetings behind closed doors, their voices low, discussing the repercussions of Leora's actions. Word had spread quickly, and the people were divided. Some praised her bravery, calling her a hero who had defied the old ways for a noble cause. Others, though, were fearful of the unknown. They whispered about the Dragon Kings, about what they might do if they learned that their sacred ritual had been interrupted. And then, one evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and the sky turned to a deep purple, the first sign arrived. The dragon stirred, its eyes glowing brightly in the dim light. It let out a soft growl, a sound that resonated deep within Leora's chest, like the distant thunder of a storm. The ground beneath her feet trembled ever so slightly, and she knew at once that something had changed. The dragon was calling. It was time. Leora stood up, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She didn't know what the dragon was calling for, but she knew it was something important, something that would shape the future of the kingdom. Without hesitation, she turned and ran toward the village, her feet pounding against the earth, her thoughts racing. The time had come. The Dragon Kings were watching, and Leora had to be ready. The fate of Valora rested on her shoulders. The night was thick with an eerie stillness as Leora stood at the entrance of the cave, staring out toward the distant horizon. Her heart beat fast in her chest, every nerve on edge. The dragon's call had stirred something deep inside her, a force she could neither name nor control. The once paralyzed creature now stood tall before her, its golden eyes fixed on the sky, as though it could sense something beyond the confines of the cave, a presence, a force, something that demanded attention. The village was quiet, its streets bathed in the soft glow of lanterns, but Leora knew that this calm was only temporary. The village, for all its fear and hesitation, was on the brink of something far greater than they had ever imagined. The dragon was not just a creature of legend. It was a living link to a world long forgotten, a power that could shape the very future of Valora. And the villagers, whether they realized it or not, were about to witness the unfolding of that power. Leora's feet carried her instinctively toward the village square, where the old ceremonial stone altar still stood empty now, but scarred from the many sacrifices that had taken place there. The air felt thick, charged with the anticipation of something momentous. Her heart raced as she approached the altar, the faint hum of magic still reverberating in her chest. It was then that she saw them, the elders. They had gathered in secret, speaking in hushed tones among themselves as they looked up at the night sky, their faces a mix of fear and uncertainty. At the head of the group was Elder Kalen, the leader of the council, whose face was usually calm and composed but now betrayed an unfamiliar tension. He saw Leora approaching and made no attempt to stop her. Instead, his eyes held a mixture of respect and apprehension, as if he had known this day would come. As she reached him, she could hear the whispers of the others behind him, their voices low and strained. "Leora," Elder Kalen said softly, his tone both calm and resigned. "You have done something no one could have predicted. You've defied the ritual, the tradition, and yet, here we are." His eyes flicked toward the altar, his expression pained. "The kingdom will not forgive this easily. You've taken the first step toward something far beyond our understanding." And the Dragon Kings. He hesitated, glancing upward as if he feared the sky itself might strike him down. "We do not know how they will react." Leora stood tall, despite the nerves that trembled within her. "I did what was right," she said firmly. "This dragon, it's not just a creature to be sacrificed. It's a part of us. It's a symbol of our future, not our past." The elders exchanged uncertain glances, their once unwavering belief in the old ways beginning to crack. Kalen's gaze softened, but it was tinged with sorrow. "You do not understand the magnitude of what you've done, Leora," he said, his voice laced with grief. "The Dragon Kings are not mere legends, they are the rulers of the skies. We've lived in peace because we've appeased them. But what you've done, you've interrupted a bond that stretches back millennia. The price for this act may be greater than any of us can imagine. Leora's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to back down. I didn't interrupt anything. I freed the dragon. I gave it a chance to live. And now we have to live with it together. Before Elder Kalen could respond, the ground beneath their feet rumbled. A low, deep vibration rippled through the earth, as though something enormous and powerful was descending upon them. Leora's eyes widened as she felt it, an ancient, primal force awakening. The dragon, standing beside her, let out a soft growl, its golden eyes flashing. It had sensed it too. The Dragon Kings were near. A roar echoed in the distance, cutting through the night like a crack of thunder. The sound sent chills down Leora's spine. The sky seemed to darken, as though the heavens themselves were being pulled into a storm. The villagers scattered in panic, but Leora stood still, her eyes locked on the horizon where the roar had originated. The dragons were coming. And then, she saw them, dark silhouettes against the moonlit sky, enormous and majestic, their wings casting shadows over the land. The Dragon Kings, the ancient creatures that had ruled over Valora for as long as anyone could remember. Their scales glinted like black metal, their wings unfurled wide, blocking out the stars above. They descended slowly, their presence like a dark cloud enveloping the village. The very air seemed to crackle with the energy of their arrival. The baby dragon beside Leora raised its head, and for a moment, she saw something in its eyes, a spark of recognition, a flash of understanding. It wasn't just a baby dragon anymore. It was a leader in its own right, an heir to a legacy that had been lost to time. The creature had come into its own, and now it stood beside Leora as an equal, ready to face the Dragon Kings. The massive dragons landed with earth-shaking force, their talons digging into the stone beneath them. Their eyes glowed with an ancient fire, their gaze fixed on the baby dragon and Leora. There was no sign of anger, no sign of violence in their eyes, but there was an undeniable sense of authority, a power that could not be ignored. For a long moment, there was silence. The air hummed with an otherworldly energy as the two dragons, immense in size, ancient beyond measure, observed Leora and the creature she had saved. The smaller dragon stepped forward, its wings folding back as it bowed its head slightly, almost in deference to the towering figures before it. Leora took a deep breath, her chest tightening. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew one thing. This was her moment. She had freed the dragon, and now it was time for her to stand tall and face whatever consequences came with her actions. I didn't mean to disrupt anything, Leora said, her voice steady but filled with resolve. I just couldn't let it die. The dragon, and all dragons, they deserve to live, to be more than just tools of sacrifice. We deserve a future, not based on blood and death, but on understanding and life. The Dragon Kings regarded her with silent eyes, their expressions unreadable. The silence stretched on, growing heavy. Then, the elder of the two dragons, the larger, older one, let out a deep, rumbling growl, not one of aggression, but of thought. Slowly, it lowered its head to Leora's level, its massive eyes locking onto hers. The air seemed to still, the moment stretching on as the weight of the creature's gaze pressed down on her. She felt the power radiating from it, ancient and eternal, like the weight of the stars themselves. You have awakened something, the dragon said, its voice like a low rumble, echoing through the very earth. The dragon you freed was never meant to be a sacrifice. It was the beginning of a change you have called forth. For centuries, we have watched over your kingdom, and for centuries, it has been bound by the chains of tradition. But now, you have undone the cycle. You have chosen a path of freedom. Leora's heart raced. This was it. This was what she had been waiting for. She had not only saved the dragon, but she had awakened something much larger, a force that could change the destiny of Valora itself. The Dragon King's gaze softened, and for the first time, a hint of approval flickered in its ancient eyes. You are the one who will guide Valora into this new age, it said. The old ways are finished. The cycle of sacrifice ends now. With that, the dragons turned, their massive wings stirring the air as they ascended into the sky once more, leaving behind a silence that was heavier than any words. The baby dragon, now fully restored, stood beside Leora, a silent promise of what was to come. The kingdom of Valora would never be the same. The dragon's call had been heard, and the path forward was clear. It was a path of life, not death, of understanding, not destruction. And Leora, The brave little girl who had defied tradition would be the one to lead them into that future. Chapter 4. A New Dawn. In the days that followed, the kingdom of Valora began to change. The Dragon Kings had returned to their mountain realms, but they left behind a message that rippled through every village, every town, every corner of the kingdom. The ritual of sacrifice was over. The people of Valora were no longer bound by the chains of the past. There would be no more blood spilled in the name of appeasing the dragons. The dragons themselves, once distant and mysterious, were now seen as equals. They were not gods to be feared, but powerful creatures who had watched over the kingdom for centuries. And now, they were partners in the kingdom's future. Leora became a symbol of that future. She had saved the dragon, yes, but she had also saved the kingdom itself from a tradition that had bound it in a cycle of fear and death. Word of her bravery spread like wildfire, and she became an icon of change, her name known throughout Valora. The elders, once the keepers of tradition, now stood by her side, acknowledging that the old ways no longer served the kingdom. The council, which had once made decisions based on fear of the Dragon Kings, now worked with Leora to forge a new path forward. Together, they established an alliance with the dragons, a partnership based on mutual respect and understanding. As the years passed, the kingdom flourished in ways it never had before. The people lived in harmony with the dragons, learning from them, working with them, and growing stronger as a result. The sacrifices were a thing of the past, and in their place, a new tradition emerged, one that celebrated life, freedom, and the bond between humans and dragons. And through it all, Leora stood at the forefront, the girl who had saved the dragon and, in doing so, had saved an entire kingdom. The world was different now, and it was all because of her. In the end, Leora realized something profound. She hadn't just saved the dragon. She had changed the course of history itself.